ورحمة الله. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Inshallah, we'll continue with Kitab al-Siyam, with the chapter of fasting from the book of Akhsar al-Mukhtasarat. And what is left, inshallah ta'ala, is what is mentioned about the recommended fasting and a small chapter about al-i'tikaf, staying in the masjid for the last 10 nights or 10 days of Ramadan. And as you already witnessed, that we're going very fast, we're being very brief, and this is absolutely fine. And this is how even the book is compiled for that reason. It's not compiled for us to be extensive and to take a long time in studying it. But the most important thing is that we have the comprehensive understanding of or perceiving the masail in the right way. As far as the adilla, the evidences and the details and so on, we can take it inshallah ta'ala to another level. And also to differentiate between the understanding of every mas'ala or every aspect of these points of the matters of fiqh versus what we might even be applying in our life with the fatawa of the ulama or ikhtiyarat al-ulama, or what the ulama, those who have the ability to make ijtihad, that we follow. There's no contradictions here. Studying is one thing, applying with regards to the differences of opinions, it's another level. So that's why we sometimes point out some of these differences, but the most important thing is to understand the words of this matn. And inshallah ta'ala, this will be benefiting for those who want to pursue further on, inshallah ta'ala. Also, very brief, a reminder for myself and everyone. We're doing that because we're getting closer to Ramadan. So seeking rewards from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by learning the ahkam of al-siyam is such an important part of preparing ourselves for Ramadan. You get rewards for this. Ta'zeem, exalting the commands of Allah in the hearts, would necessitate for the person to understand what needed from us, what pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when we do the acts of worship, versus someone that really doesn't care much. So this is a great deed, inshallah ta'ala, and that's why we also have to take care of ourselves, our hearts, our iman, preparing ourselves for Ramadan. And for example, in the month of Sha'ban, the Prophet ﷺ used to fast most of the month or all of the month of Sha'ban, preparing oneself for the month of Ramadan. And this is from the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And the dua, as the early generations of Islam used to make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala before Ramadan, 6 months or so, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make them witness the month of Ramadan because of the great virtue of Ramadan. But this is a different context also, inshallah ta'ala. One last point is, maybe we'll do that at the end, but remind me with the last point, inshallah. Right? There's something that I wanted to mention at the end, and hopefully, inshallah ta'ala, I won't forget. But it's about husn al-ahd. Husn al-ahd. If you remind me of this, these two words, husn al-ahd, in the last, inshallah, in 1 minute, we need to observe that, inshallah ta'ala. So we stopped at fasl, the subchapter of yusannu sawmu kada wa kada. So what is recommended in fasting? Page number 148. Page number 148. And please follow what's in the book to the best of our ability, word by word. And bear with me. If you don't see the benefit of it, inshallah ta'ala, you will see it some other time, inshallah, later, inshallah. But take this matn in this chapter, understand every word of it. If you missed the previous lectures, go back to it, go through the words, and take this with you. Human beings, they come and go. Hearts are in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to keep us firm upon the deen. People die, things like this. But what stays is the ilm that we have. We need to keep this with us. It's easy to give a lecture, general talk about ahkam of al-siyam, and you're more attached to the speaker and motivating speakers, speeches and so on. But what's more important is to go through the sources of ilm, to be more attached to the books of ilm, and to learn this and to keep it with us, inshallah ta'ala. So yusannu, this is fi'l mudara', this is a present tense with regards to what is recommended in the context of fiqh. So it's recommended sawm, fasting, and then he lists some of the recommended fasting. This version that you have with you is a way that they made it easy for us to categorize things. Otherwise the mutun does not have the 1 and 2 and all of these ease and punctuations and things like this. So it's recommended to fast what? Ayyam al-bid. Ayyam, plural of yawm. So the days of al-bid. Al-bid from white, and that refers to the days of the 13th, the 14th, the 15th of every month, Hijri, lunar month. Why it's called Ayyamul Bid? Because it's full moon. So it refers to the nights and not the days. The nights, usually the moon looks like as if it's white, so they call it Ayyamul Bid. It's recommended to fast any 3 days in every month. But there are specifics in some of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ with regards to the 13th and the 14th and the 15th as being the best. If you're not able to do that, any 3 days throughout the month, this is also something that is recommended. So Ayyamul Bid, wal Khamis, Thursday, wal Ithnain, and Monday. And the Prophet ﷺ used to fast Mondays and Thursdays, and as the hadith of Usama ibn Zayd radiallahu anhu and Muslim Imam Ahmad and others, it's a long hadith, but in it that the Prophet ﷺ sometimes kana yasrudu ayyaman, he would fast consecutive days, one day after the other like this. And in other times he would not fast every other day, but he would still keep Mondays and Thursdays. So the Prophet ﷺ would always fast Mondays and Thursdays. And there are a hadith in which he mentioned about his birth date on Monday, and the Mondays and Thursdays, the deeds are presented to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's virtue, following the way the Prophet ﷺ, to fast Mondays and Thursdays. وَسِتٍ مِّن Shawwal, and 6 days from Shawwal. 6 days from Shawwal. Shawwal is after Ramadan, and the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, مَنْ صَامَ Ramadan, whoever fasts the month of Ramadan, ثُمَّ أَتْبَعَهُ سِتٍ مِّن Shawwal, then he follows it with 6 days of Shawwal, as if he fasted the entire year. And the wisdom behind that, the hasana is multiplied by 10. So you have a month, that means 300 days, and then 6 days times 10, so it's 360 days. So this is something recommended, but after the day of Eid, it's haram as it will come to fast the day of Eid, the first day of Shawwal. Whether it's to be done consecutively or other than that, it's fine, because the Prophet ﷺ in the hadith, he says, وَسِتْ ثُمَّ أَتْبَعُهُ سِتْ مِن Shawwal. 6 days from Shawwal. He did not say 6 days consecutively, one after the other. Even though the ulama, they say it's best to do it one after the other. From the perspective is that if you have something, do it. Allah knows best what's going to happen to you. You might be lazy, you might forget. So, and you're still fresh from Ramadan, you can do it right one after the other, but it doesn't have to be that way. And we're not going to so much details or adilla that is associated with this. وَشَهْرِ اللَّهِ الْمُحَرَّمِ. Number 5 is the month of Allah, Al-Muharram, as it's mentioned like that in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. So Al-Muharram is the first month in the lunar calendar, in the Hijri calendar, and there's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that the best of fasting after Ramadan is in the month of Allah, Al-Muharram. The month of Al-Muharram, which is the 3rd month after Dhul Qa'dah and Dhul Hijjah, and then Muharram, the 3 consecutive months of the months of Al-Haram, Al-Ashhur Al-Hurum, and then Rajab is separated from them, the 4 sacred months. And the month of Al-Muharram, the entire month, it's mentioned as a virtue to fast. But then وَآكَدُهُ, and the most stressed from At-Ta'keed, Sunnah Mu'akkada, the stressed Sunnah. So آكَدُهُ, the most stressed in its recommended act as far as fasting in the month of Al-Muharram is Al-Ashir, ثم التاسع. Al-Ashir is the 10th of Al-Muharram, which is the day of Ashura. Then At-Tasa', then the 9th. And this is a very precise statement from in the Matni here, as we know that Al-Ashir is the day of Ashura, the day that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saved Musa alayhi salam, and the Prophet alayhi salatu fasted it, and it was an obligation, then it became recommended only. And there are many different hadiths about this. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said, لَإِنْ عِشْتُ إِلَى قَابِلٍ, if I would live for the next year, I would fast the 9th. So the 9th and the 10th, and Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, he mentioned the maratib or the levels of it. The 9th and the 10th only, the 9th and the 10th is better. The 9th and the 10th and the 11th, if people are not sure when did the month started. And this is mentioned also within the masail of this. But why mentioning the tasa' by itself? ثُمَّ التاسع. Why? Because the tasa' or the 9th is mentioned in the hadith. So say for example someone is not going to fast the 10th, right, for whatever reason there is, but he can fast the 9th. Fast the 9th. We're not saying that the 9th will take place of Al-Ashir or the day of Ashura, but since the 9th is mentioned in the hadith, that's why he says it like this. Al-Ashir ثم التاسع. So the best day in Muharram in fasting is the 10th. The second one in the level of virtue is the 9th. You understand this point? طيب. Then he says وتسع ذي الحجة. The 9 days of the Hijjah. We always refer to the first 10 days of the Hijjah from at-Taghlib, from what is more likely to be said, but it's really the 9 days because the 10th is the first day of Eid, which is haram to fast. So the first 9 days of the Hijjah, it's recommended to fast because the days of the Hijjah, the first 10 days, as it's mentioned in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, the most beloved deeds to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is to be done in these days, and one of which is fasting. There's no specifics, even though some of the narrations mentions about specific fasting for the 9 days of the Hijjah, and some of the Sahaba would fast the first 9 days of the Hijjah. But the general reward in good deeds in general in the first 10 days of the Hijjah, so that's why it's recommended. وَآكَدُهُ, what آكَدُهُ means, and the most stressed of the 9 days of the Hijjah is يَوْمُ عَرَفَةَ لِغَيْرِ حَاجٍ بِهَا, the day of Arafah, which is the 9th. But with the condition لِغَيْرِ حَاجٍ بِهَا, for other than those who are making Hajj. For those who are making Hajj, it's better not to fast the day of Arafah, unless a person would need to fast, as it's going to be the mention afterwards about those who have hadi that they have to slaughter, but they don't have the money for it. So they fast 3 days in Hajj and 7 days when they return home, if they don't have the money to slaughter and they are making Hajj tamattu or qiran, where they have to slaughter. So in that case, 3 days before the day of Eid is better. If not, then the days of the Tashriq is to be observed, but not the 10th. So one of which is the day of Arafah. So for someone making Hajj and he doesn't have the money for slaughtering, for the Hajj, then it's best for him to include the day of Arafah in fasting. But in general, the Prophet ﷺ, he was not fasting in the day of Arafah, and people were hesitant in the day of Arafah, debating with themselves, is the Prophet ﷺ fasting or not? So the Prophet ﷺ, he stood up and he drank a cup of milk in front of everyone. Right? So to show people that he was not fasting in the day of Arafah. And even some of the ulama, they say it's an evidence that to eat less in the day of Arafah, because you're busy with the dua. And the Prophet ﷺ, the entire day, he drank a cup of milk. But anyway, so the day of the 9th of the Hijjah is recommended, and it expiates the sin of 2 years, as the Prophet ﷺ said in the authentic hadith, for other than those who are making Hajj. Those who are making Hajj, they are beyond this in rewards. But it's the mercy of Allah that the entire ummah of the Prophet ﷺ can share from this benefit. Then afterwards he says, number 7, وَأَفْضَلُ الصِّيَامِ, the best of fasting, the best state of fasting, by the statement of the Prophet ﷺ when it comes to the recommended fasting, not in general, not in the absolute sense. The absolute sense, Ramadan. Fard, no comparison. You cannot make a comparison between something fard and something recommended. Salatul Dhuhr, right, in Ramadan, that many people might neglect or belittle it, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is far more in rewards than someone praying every night in Ramadan, the entire night, Qiyamul Layl. Because Salatul Dhuhr is fard. So you don't put in comparison fard with nafl. وَمَا تَقَرَّبَ إِلَيَّ عَبْدِي بِشَيْءٍ أَحَبَّ إِلَيَّ مِمَّا افْتَرَضْتُ عَلَيْهِ. No one can draw himself closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by something more beloved to Allah than the fard. Fard is at a different level. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it an obligation. But as far as the best of fasting of what is recommended, صَوْمُ يَوْمٍ وَفِطْرُ يَوْمٍ, to fast one day, and fitr, to break your fast the next day, which is siyamhu, as the Prophet ﷺ said, Siyam Dawood alayhi salam. And by the way, the best fasting is the fasting of Dawood alayhi salam. كَانَ يَصُومُ يَوْمًا وَيُفْطُرُ يَوْمًا. He would fast one day and then break his fast the next day. It's the most difficult type of fasting. It's easier to fast every day for your entire life because you get used to it. But when you fast and you break your fast the next day and so on, you're not used to one way or the other. So the mujahada, the struggle is more even. But this is the best level of fasting. More than that is not recommended. Unless there's a reason behind it. A person is not married, for example. The Prophet ﷺ advised those who are not married and he does not have the means to get married is to fast. And fasting for them is not Mondays and Thursdays. It's not even every other day. It's to keep on fasting till Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for you. Except of course what's haram, like the days of Eid or so. But the best of fasting is this fasting of the Prophet Dawood. And also the best night prayer is the salah of Dawood also alayhi salam. كان ينام نصف الليل. He used to sleep half of the night. ثم يقوم ثلثه. Then he gets up at night and pray 1/3 of it. And then وينام سدسه. And then he sleeps the last 1/6 of the night. And the night, whether from Maghrib till Fajr, then you make your ratio calculation, or from Isha to Fajr, this is fine. But one thing to leave you with this, right, and as a homework, why Dawood alayhi salam? Reflect about Dawood alayhi salam and how he is mentioned in the Quran, and how much Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bestowed his favor upon Dawood alayhi salam. And there's an ayah in the Quran that refers to Dawood alayhi salam with regards to the shukr of Allah. وَقَلِيلٌ مِّنْ عِبَادِيَ الشَّكُورِ. Very few among the slaves of Allah are grateful. So this is the gratefulness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by Dawood alayhi salam, that he had the best optional fasting and the best night prayer. Alhamdulillah, we have ni'am, favors of Allah, that we are immersed in it. Countless favors of Allah. How to be grateful to Allah? Where is our ibadah? Look for the ibadah. Search for the acts of worship and ibadah. And of course, that ibadah without ilm, by the way, seeking knowledge. What is the first or the most recommended nafl, optional acts of worship after the fard? Even in the books of fiqh, in the madhab and others, what is the first thing that is mentioned? Seeking ilm. Seeking knowledge comes before any other ibadah. But seeking knowledge is not for the sake of knowledge, to have information, but to have the knowledge, to apply the knowledge. Prophet ﷺ, how his ibadah, the early generations of Islam, the imma of this deen, they would seek the knowledge, and they have a share also of the recommended acts of ibadah, which is another subject that we need to get ourselves to have more knowledge of, how to have the perfect combination between al-ilm wal-ibadah. Innama al-ilm al-khashya. The ilm is the fear of Allah. If we don't have the fear of Allah with so much information, it's not called ilm unless it has with it the fear of Allah and applying what we learn by the mercy of Allah. Then after that, he says, وَكُرِهَا. So after mentioning what is recommended, these 7 types of recommended fast, then what is disliked. وَكُرِهَا makruh. That means if you leave it, you get rewards. If you do it, there's no sin, but you're getting yourself closer to the haram, so stay away from it. Ifradu Rajab. Ifrad from al-fard is singling out one. Rajab. Rajab, fasting in the month of Rajab. To specifically fast in the month of Rajab. The month of Rajab is one of the sacred months. The good deeds are multiplied, no doubt about this. Fast in Rajab as you fast in Dhul Qa'dah, for example, as you fast in Dhul Hijjah, but singling out Rajab as the ways of the Jahiliyyah they used to do, this is what is makruh. Not about fasting in Rajab, it's about singling out Rajab for fasting. And Umar radiallahu anhu used to hit Aydil Mutarajjibin. He would hit the hands of those who they want to exalt the month of Rajab to make them break their fast, because they were fasting Rajab for specific belief in Rajab, not fasting in general. Well, Jumu'ah, and singling out Jumu'ah, Friday, in fasting. You fast a day before it or a day after it, as the hadith in Bukhari by the Prophet ﷺ. And also a Sabt, singling out Saturday. Fasting Saturday is permissible, is recommended if it's a day before or a day after. But singling out Saturday, this is makruh and not haram, disliked. Washak, the doubtful day. And we talked about a shak. And it's a tricky understanding of a shak in the madhab here. The shak, what is the day of doubt? In Sha'ban, for example, it's the day where the moon was not sighted and it was clear. That means it's the 30th day of Sha'ban. This day is not permissible to fast. Some said it's haram and some said it's makruh. But if you remember, if there was ghaym, if it was cloudy, or people were not able to see the crescent, according to the madhab, is that the fasting of that day, which is the 30th of Sha'ban, then in that case becomes mandatory to save yourself from the doubt of the Ramadan. This is the other 3 imams are not upon this, but we're talking about what's in the book. But Yawm al-Shak here, to understand what is the Shak meant here, is that people didn't see the crescent, the moon, and it was clear for them. So it's the 30th of Sha'ban. وَكُلِّ عِيدٍ لِلْكُفَّارِ. Every Eid, every holiday for the kuffar, it's makruh to fast it. And why is it makruh and not haram, as the ulama they say? Because usually for Eid, people don't fast. Eid, people celebrate, they eat, right? So that's why they kind of lessen the tone of But if someone celebrate any of the Eid of the Kuffar, this is not permissible. وَتَقَدُّمُ رَمَضَانَ بِيَوْمٍ أَوْ يَوْمَيْنِ, fasting taqaddum, to come forward or to do something prior Ramadan, the month of Ramadan, with a day or two, as the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ stated this, to fast a day or two before Ramadan so that it's not confused with the fard. This is the statement of the Prophet ﷺ, not to fast a day or two before Ramadan unless you have a sawm, fasting, that your habit of fasting Mondays and Thursdays and you're always doing that, or every other day, then you are in a different category. It's okay to do that. But for anyone else, as a way to save themselves, not to confuse it with Ramadan, not to fast a day or two before Ramadan. And that's what he says, ما لم يوافق عادة في الكل, unless it's يوافق. الموافقة is when you coincide with something. عادة is the habit. في الكل, meaning in all of them. That means if it's not a عادة, if it's not a usual fast that you're fasting, then you don't fast a day or two before. Then the last part of this aspect of fasting, وحرم صوم. After mentioning what's recommended, what's makruh, then now وحرم صوم, haram. It's forbidden for a person to fast. Number one, العيدين مطلقا. The two Eids mutlaqan. Mutlaqan means in the absolute sense. There's no عادة, there's no habit, there's no Mondays and Thursdays, there's nothing whatsoever. And the Eidain here refers to the Eid al-Fitr is one day, which is the 1st of Shawwal. It's forbidden to fast that day. And for Eid al-Adha, the 10th, and then to make sure that we're clear on this, وَأَيَّامِ التَّشْرِيقِ. And the 3 days follows that, the 11th, the 12th, and the 13th. إِلَّا عَنْ دَمِ مُتْعَةٍ وَقِرَانٍ. Unless a person in Hajj, and he has a hadi that he has to fast, he doesn't have the means to slaughter, as we mentioned before, then he fasts 3 days in Hajj and 7 days after he returns home. And if he didn't fast it before the 10th, then he can fast the Ayam al-Tashriq, the 3 days of al-Tashriq, the 11th, the 12th, and the 13th of the Hijjah for the one making Hajj. If not, then he should not fast these days. These days are days of eating and drinking and dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as the Prophet ﷺ said. And it's called al-Tashriq from al-Shuruq, from rise, from sun, because they used to get their meat out after the slaughtering, to dry it, to make the dry meat, to take it with them and things of that nature. And then he says, the last mas'ala here, وَمَنْ دَخَلَ فِي فَرْضٍ مُوَسَّعٍ. مَنْ دَخَلَ, whoever enters, right? And this is not a physical entrance, but whoever is in the state of fard muwassa. He have a fard of fasting that he has to fast, but it's muwassa. Muwassa, that means it's spacious. So whoever fasting, man dakhala, this refers to fasting. Whoever fasts, entered into fasting in a fard. So it's a fard fasting, it's an obligatory fasting, but muwassa, not Ramadan, making up a day of fasting. Muwassa, spacious, that means he still have time. He's making up days, or she's making up days from Ramadan, and this was in the month of Shawwal afterwards. So the next Ramadan is not there yet, so there's still some time. So this is muwassa. حَرُمَ قَطْعُهُ بِلَا عُذْرٍ. According to the madhab here, it's haram to break that fast unless you have a udhr, which means an excuse to do so. Right? But the other opinion is that it's okay to break the fast since you have time. Right? أو نفل غير حج وعمرة كره بلا عذر. Or if it's nafl, recommended fast, other than hajj and umrah, كره بلا عذر. Nafl, if you're making hajj nafl, you already made the obligatory hajj. And now the second or the third or whatever hajj is not obligatory upon you. Same thing for umrah. Umrah, the first one is an obligation according to the madhab and others. But if the second and third and so on, it's not obligatory umrah. But what if you are in state of ihram for hajj or umrah and it's not fard upon you? It's fard on you to continue to complete the hajj and umrah. وَأَتِمُّ الْحَجَّ وَالْعُمْرَةَ لِلَّهِ. You cannot quit in the middle of the umrah when you're in state of ihram. So, I quit. The same thing when you say Allah Akbar for salah, even if it's nafl, it's not permissible to just walk out of the salah unless there's a reason for it. So that's what it means. أو نفل غير حج وعمرة كره بلا عذر. It is disliked to break your nafl fasting without an excuse. But again, also the other opinion, you are amiru nafsi, the one fasting a recommended fast. He is the amir of his own self. He wants to break his fast, that's fine. But he said here that is disliked. Wallahu a'lam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. And it's disliked out of the aspect that you are in ibadah. Why leave it unless you have a valid reason? But it's permissible, it's not haram. I'm not sure about the time, but very briefly with the i'tikaf, very briefly, very brief. And this is always associated with fasting the month of Ramadan. He says, وَالْاعْتِكَافُ sunnah. Al-i'tikaf from عَكَفَ يَعْكُفُ عُكُوفًا, that means when someone is upon something and he doesn't leave it. Right? So al-i'tikaf here religiously is when you're staying in the masjid. Luzum al-masjid, to stay in the masjid with the intention of making ibadah. And it's sunnah, it's recommended because the Prophet ﷺ did it, the companions after the Prophet ﷺ did it, and the Prophet ﷺ did it in the beginning of Ramadan, the middle of Ramadan, the last of Ramadan, then he made it in the last of Ramadan, seeking Laylatul Qadr, so it's the last 10 days of Ramadan. The Prophet ﷺ made up some days in Shawwal, but for the general part it's in Ramadan, and some associated it with fasting, so it should be done in Ramadan. People, when they make i'tikaf on other than Ramadan, it should be associated with fasting. So in Ramadan, this is what is meant here. وَلَا يَصِحُّ مِمَّنْ تَلْزَمُهُ الْجَمَاعَةُ إِلَّا فِي مَسْجِدٍ تُقَامُ فِيهِ. I'tikaf is not valid from someone, لا يصح, ممن, from someone, تلزمه, اللازم is mandatory upon him. Someone that al-jama'a, congregational prayer, is mandatory upon him. Then if it's in a masjid that doesn't have jama'a established, then it's not valid for someone to make i'tikaf in it. But for those who al-jama'a talzamuhum, which means men. For a woman, for example, if she makes i'tikaf in a masjid, there's no jama'a established in it or the 5 daily salah, but it's a masjid, that's valid as long as it's safe and no mixing and so on. But for a man that is mandatory for him to make jama'a, then the i'tikaf has to be in a masjid that jama'a is established. Doesn't have to be Jumu'ah. He can go out for Jumu'ah and come back. But the 5 daily salah should be established in it. إِلَّا فِي مَسْجِدٍ تُقَامُ فِيهِ, unless it's in a masjid that is established in it. Can you make i'tikaf at home? No, there's no i'tikaf at home. If you stay at home, you know, because you want to be away from people to make ibadah, but not salatul jama'ah, you have to go make salatul jama'ah. Can women make the i'tikaf at home? No, it's not called i'tikaf. The i'tikaf is in the masjid. And the wives of the Prophet ﷺ used to make i'tikaf in the masjid. But as long, again, there's no mixing, there is no haram involved or even potential of any haram. In ata alayhi salah. So it becomes not valid if the salah comes. Meaning, to understand this mas'ala very quickly, if someone made i'tikaf in a masjid, right, and he started, for example, before Maghrib or after Fajr, but before Maghrib, he entered into the i'tikaf. And then his i'tikaf is valid. But then Salatul Isha came and he discovered that there's no Salat Jama'ah in this masjid. Then it was valid only till the time of the Salah comes, then it's not valid anymore for him. So this is to be precise. So the masjid has to be Jama'ah established in it. And then after mentioning the places of al-i'tikaf, وَشُرِطَ لَهُ طَهَارَةٌ مِمَّا يُوجِبُ غُسْلًا. As a condition for the i'tikaf is to be in state of tahara. You stay in the masjid. So the major tahara has to be there. A person breaks his wudu, that's fine, it doesn't break the i'tikaf. But طَهَارَةٌ مِمَّا يُوجِبُ غُسْلًا. If it necessitates for him to make ghusl, to take a shower ghusl, then he has to make ghusl. If he is in state of janaba, then he has to make ghusl and then continue the i'tikaf, it doesn't break it. But to continue to be in the state of janaba, of course this is not permissible. And if a person is waiting for his turn, they're taking a turn to make ghusl, for example, and he's in the state of janaba, make wudu to lessen the level of the tahara here till you make the ghusl, and that would permit for him to stay in the masjid till he's able to make ghusl. Then the next mas'ala, وَإِن نَذَرَهُ أَوْ الصَّلَاةَ فِي مَسْجِدٍ وَإِن نَذَرَهُ. Condition here, or a mas'ala, if a person may have a nadhr or a vow to make i'tikaf. As we know that vow or nadhr makes what's mubah, permissible, or what's recommended, becomes an obligation. It's makruh, it's just like to do that. It's even some said it's haram. Why make something obligatory upon you when you're at ease? Someone made nadhr that he would make i'tikaf. Or as-salah fi masjid, or to make salah in a masjid. He made nadhr that if something happened or without anything happens, that he would make salah in a specific masjid or in masjid. غَيْرِ الثَّلَاثَةِ, other than the 3 masajid. Who are the 3 masajid? What are the 3 masajid? The Masjid al-Haram in Mecca, Masjid al-Nabawi in the Prophet ﷺ city al-Medina, and al-Masjid al-Aqsa. So if a person made nadhr, a vow to make i'tikaf, but not in the 3 masajid, right? فَلَهُ فِعْلُهُ فِي غَيْرِ. Pay attention to this. He has, it's permissible, فَلَهُ, for him, it's permissible for him, فِعْلُهُ, to apply the nadhr, to fulfill his vow, فِي غَيْرِ, in other than the masjid that he specified to make i'tikaf in. So if a person made a vow upon himself, and the vow has to be uttered with one's speech, cannot be intentions in the heart. He has to say it out loud, even if he's the only one hearing it. He would say upon himself that he would make i'tikaf in this specific, in Masjid al-Ribat, for example. Upon him that to make i'tikaf in that specific masjid. He doesn't have to make it in Masjid al-Ribat. He can make it in any other masjid. But as long as the nadhr was not in one of the three masajid. What if the nadhr is in one of the three masajid? This is the continuation of the mas'ala. وَفِي أَحَدِهَا, meaning in one of the three masajid. فَلَهُ فِعْلُهُ فِيهِ وَفِي الْأَفْضَلِ. Very precise. فَلَهُ, to him, فِعْلُهُ, to fulfill his nadhr, his vow, فِيهِ, in whatever he made the nadhr in. وَفِي الْأَفْضَلِ, and what's better than it. What does that mean? Example, someone made a nadhr, a vow, that he would make i'tikaf in the masjid of the Prophet ﷺ in Al-Madinah. Right? This is a vow. He said it with his own tongue. That means he has to make the i'tikaf there, which is very easy and simple, or in Al-Masjid al-Haram in Mecca. That's fine. That fulfills his nadhr, because the Masjid al-Haram is better, more rewards in the salah there. But he cannot make the nadhr in Al-Masjid al-Aqsa in this case, because it's of a lesser reward in the three masajid. And he cannot fulfill the nadhr in any other of the three masajid. You understand this here? So, but if he made the nadhr, a vow that he would make i'tikaf in Al-Masjid al-Haram in Mecca, then he has to make it in Mecca. It would not suffice for him to make it in Al-Madinah. And the salah in Mecca, of course, as we know, is 100,000 times multiplied. In Medina is 1,000, in Masjid al-Aqsa 500. So this is that specific mas'ala here with regards to al-i'tikaf. وأفضلها المسجد الحرام ثم مسجد النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. The best of it is the Masjid al-Haram in Mecca, then the Masjid of the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام. ولا يخرج من اعتكف منذورا متتابعا إلا لما لا بد منه. If someone لا يخرج, he does not go out, من اعتكف, the one that made the i'tikaf, منذورا, the i'tikaf was by nadhr. متتابعا, the nadhr was consecutive days. And it's all upon the intention of the person, what he said. Except the one that has no way out of it. إِلَّا لِمَا لَبُدَّ مِنْ. A necessity that he has to leave the i'tikaf, then it doesn't break his nadhr. But if it's not permissible for him to leave the masjid if the nadhr was for consecutive days of al-i'tikaf. وَلَا يَعُودُ مَرِيضًا. He is not to visit the sick. We're talking about the i'tikaf of nadhr, vow. I'tikaf of Ramadan, it's recommended i'tikaf. So if someone leaves the i'tikaf to visit the sick, it's not haram, but it breaks the i'tikaf. He has to resume it again, but it's not a sin. But if it's nadhr, it's different because it's an obligation. It's clear? So this is what is mentioned here with regards to the nadhr or the vow. He is not to visit a sick, وَلَا يَشْهَدُ جَنَازَةً, and he does not witness a janazah, does not go to a janazah, إِلَّا بِشَرْط, except with a condition. Some people might misunderstand what is the meaning of bishart. Bishart meaning, not that the janazah is a condition of the janazah, that the janazah of such a great person or so, no. Shart here means that when he made the nadhr, when he made the vow, he made a condition. That I would make i'tikaf in the masjid unless there's a janazah, unless there is this. So if you make a condition, then it's okay for him to go out and to come back right away after he fulfilled that reason that he made as a condition. And this is only for the nadhr, i'tikaf, the vow, the i'tikaf made by vow, because it's an obligation. وَوَطْءُ الْفَرْجِ يُفْسِدُ. If a person had, and very specific, وَطْء الْفَرْجِ, the full relations with one's wife, يُفْسِدُ, breaks the i'tikaf. How can a person do that in the masjid? No. Because the ayah says, وَلَا تُبَاشِرُهُنَّ وَأَنْتُمْ عَاكِفُونَ فِي الْمَسَاجِدِ. Do not have intimacy with your wives when you are making i'tikaf in the masjid. It's not in the masjid, of course. This is a major evil action if a person does this. But it refers to someone in i'tikaf and he has to go home. To go to the bathroom, because they used to not have, for example, bathrooms in the masjid. So he goes home for whatever reason there is. If he has relations with his wife, that breaks the i'tikaf. Or وَكَذَا إِنزَالٌ بِمُبَاشَرَةٍ. Also if there's discharge as a result of intimacy or caressing or touching and so. Because as we heard before, if there is touching and caressing and so on, and there is discharge as a result of that, that breaks the fast. If the discharge because of thinking, it doesn't break the fast. And the discharge is different than the seminal fluid. So that breaks the i'tikaf. If someone goes home and you have intimacy even with touching or kissing with his wife, then that breaks the i'tikaf. وَيَلْزَمُ لِإِفْسَادِهِ. If the i'tikaf is not valid, is ruined with the vow one, the obligatory i'tikaf, and the i'tikaf was for specific days, this year, Ramadan or something, and now he broke it, it's not valid for him anymore. Kafaratu yamin, what does he do with a vow? To expiate the expiation of taking an oath when a person is not able to fulfill it, which is to feed 10 people or to clothe them. If not, then to fast 3 days. Because he cannot make it anymore, because it was very specific for specific place or specific time. The last thing is, وَسُنَّ بِتَأَكُّدٍ, it's recommended, it's very stressed, بِتَأَكُّد. بِتَأَكُّد, that means it's very stressed, not just recommended. اشتغاله بالقرب. اشتغاله, الاشتغال, الشغل is when a person is busy with something. بالقرب, al-qurab is what gets you closer to Allah. So it's recommended, very stressed. Why are you sitting in the masjid? To socialize and to get to know the brothers and everything like this? No. It's time to seclude yourself with ibadah, with the worship of Allah. The Prophet ﷺ used to have his own, they would make a khibat, like a tent for the Prophet ﷺ, and he goes in it, comes out to pray with the people in jama'ah, and then he's busy with his ibadah on his own, alayhi salatu wasalam. To be busy with al-qurab, the reciting of the Quran, dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, dua. That's why before Ramadan we get used to ourselves to this, because we get exposed in Ramadan. You want to do ibadah, you want to read Quran, but you don't find your heart in it. You can't find yourself to be doing it. So that's why preparing ourselves, like the same thing, you rush to the obligatory salah versus someone that comes early and prays sunnah and things like this. And that's why it's to prepare oneself. اشتغال بالقرب واجتناب ما لا يعنيه. The second thing, اجتناب, to stay away. فاجتنبوا, that means stay away from. The khamr, to stay away from it. واجتناب ما لا يعني, to stay away from what does not concerns him. I'm not talking about sins here, of course, this is an obvious thing. You're in i'tikaf. Stay away from what does not concern you. What happened to this brother, what happened here, there, talking about politics, talking about the whole world. You're busy with ibadah. This is the time where if there's a time to seclude, to make uzlah, to make seclusion with ibadah, this is the time to do it in the last 10 days of Ramadan. This is the last mas'ala here in the i'tikaf. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us benefit. And again, as I said, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive us if we did not do justice to this, as also Sheikh Muhammad mentioned with what he was talking about. But it's upon each and every one of us not to be, this is the end of it. No, to go back and to see every word if we understood it. Inshallah, there will be an exam, and it will be sent to you if you want. But for those who are present, if you want to, you can leave your email. Just a simple online exam like this, if you want to take it, inshallah ta'ala. But take this matter serious, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept from us. And maybe the purpose that we did it this way, maybe one even person, if they get the zeal of seeking knowledge, mashallah, to be a student of knowledge in a serious matter, mashallah, this is a great success. And this is what stays forever in the virtue of al-ilm. And the advice to myself and everyone, reviving the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, reviving the way of the Salaf in this midst of the fitan, is to be busy with this. Rather than busy with he said or she said or this person did or whatever. We need to seek knowledge of the deen of Allah and to be busy with that. One last thing, because I took too much of the time that is needed, even though I did not exceed the 45 minutes, by the way. But things started late. Husn al-ahd. Right? Just an advice for myself and everyone. Does anybody know what Husn al-ahd? You remember a hadith about Husn al-ahd? The Prophet ﷺ said something about Husn al-ahd. Husn al-ahd, this is hadith in Bukhari and others. Husn is goodness, al-ahd is covenant. But this terminology refers to if you have someone that you has a suhbah or a companion or a friend or a relationship or anything in the past, or you met someone, part of al-iman is to honor this. Not to cut and sever the relationship, this is haram of course, but also to have this wafa or this faithfulness to those people that you met in your life. You are in a journey. You meet people, right? And some people, they sever these types of relationships, but the Prophet ﷺ, he said to Aisha radiallahu anha, Ya Aisha, inna husna al-ahdi min al-iman. Keeping the good relationships with those who you know is a part of al-iman. Something part of the iman, increases your iman. A father, a mother, of course, friends in the past, keeping the relationship, of course, as long as you don't commit sins. And even if it's a couple of days like this, you know, people get to see each other, but then afterwards they don't know anything about the relationship, they don't mention one. make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for one another. Keep the relationship, keep the way that, inshallah ta'ala, till we return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this hadith was, the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam came to him, an old woman. And Aisha, she was so amazed at how the Prophet ﷺ was welcoming this old woman. And he kept on asking, كيف حالك, how are you? How's this and how's your things? And so after this old woman, she left, she asked the Prophet ﷺ, why would you do that much, welcoming to this old woman? He said, كانت تأتينا أيام خديجة. She used to come to us at the time of Khadija radiallahu anha. And then he said to Aisha radiallahu anha, يا عائشة إن حسن العهد من الإيمان. O Aisha, the good covenant, or to keep the goodness of those who were in your past, is part of al-Iman. So the opposite of that is when people boycott one another and sever their relationships. This is all, this harshness in the heart, this is against perfecting one's Iman. So this is a whole lecture by itself. And there are so many incidences and hadith, and the Prophet ﷺ gave us the best example of that. So I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that relationship continues, and people ask about one another and make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for one another, and acknowledge the favors that we have towards one another. And those who are present are not less in favor than those who are speaking. Actually, you have more favors upon those who speak than the one that speaks, because this is how we get rewards from one another, and this is how we learn from one another. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to keep that relationship and to make us all gathered in the day of judgment with the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, and to enter the Jannah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I'll stop here inshallah ta'ala. And for furthermore, because again I feel like we didn't fulfill the rights of this, inshallah ta'ala, to be continued if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala Muhammadin wa alayhi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.